The weight of silence. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor hummed like dying wasps. Emma sat in the plastic chair that had molded itself to her body over the past 72 hours, her arthritic fingers wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long since turned cold. The antiseptic smell burned her nostrils, but she barely noticed any more. Nothing mattered except the steady beep of machines keeping her son alive in the room behind her. Michael had been her miracle baby, born when the doctor said it was impossible, when she and Harold had given up hope after 15 years of trying. Now, at 34, he lay unconscious, his body broken from a car accident that shouldn't have happened on a Tuesday morning drive to work. The drunk driver who'd run the red light had walked away with scratches. Life's cruel mathematics never balanced. Emma checked her watch for the 100th time. Where was Olivia? She'd called her daughter-in-law 6 hours ago when the doctor said there wasn't much time left. "I'll be right there," Olivia had promised, her voice tight with what Emma had interpreted as shock. That was before noon. The afternoon sun had already begun its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the waiting room windows. A nurse approached, the kind one with the gentle eyes who'd been checking on Emma throughout the vigil. "Mrs. Patterson, would you like to sit with him for a while? Sometimes they can hear us." Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. She followed the nurse into the ICU room where machines breathed for her son, where tubes and wires connected him to a world he was slowly leaving behind. His face was peaceful despite the bruising, and for a moment she could see the little boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered, taking his hand in both of hers. His wedding ring caught the light, white gold, expensive, chosen by Olivia, who had very particular tastes about these things. Emma had never understood why Michael had been drawn to such a cold woman, but love, she'd learned, rarely made sense from the outside. The door burst open with unnecessary force. Olivia swept in wearing designer heels that clicked against the linoleum like a countdown timer. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, as if she'd stopped at a salon before coming to watch her husband die. "How is he?" Olivia asked, but her eyes were already scanning the medical equipment, the charts, anything but Michael's face. "The same." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Where were you?" "Traffic was terrible. You know how the city gets." Olivia pulled out her phone, checking messages even as her husband's life support hummed beside her. "Have the doctors said anything new?" "They're doing everything they can." Olivia nodded absently, typing a response to someone. Emma stared at her, trying to reconcile this woman with the one Michael had fallen in love with. During their courtship, Olivia had been charming, attentive, full of plans for their future together. She'd called Emma Mom and brought flowers to Sunday dinners. But something had shifted after the wedding, a gradual cooling that Michael seemed oblivious to, or perhaps willfully blind to. "I should call my mother," Olivia said suddenly. "She'll want to know." Your mother, Emma thought. Not our family. Not Michael's mother, who's been here for 3 days. Your mother, who you talk to twice a week and see twice a year. Olivia stepped out to make her calls, leaving Emma alone with her son again. She smoothed his hair, remembering how he used to hate when she did that as a teenager. "She's not coming back," she whispered to him. "Not really. But I'm here, baby. Mama's here." The machines beeped steadily, marking time like a metronome counting down the moments they had left. Emma found herself thinking about the conversation she'd had with Michael just 2 weeks ago when he'd asked her to meet him for lunch without Olivia. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he'd said over coffee at their usual diner. His hands had been shaking slightly as he stirred sugar into his cup. 1, 2, 3 teaspoons, the way he'd done since childhood when he was nervous. "What is it, honey?" "I've been having some chest pains. The doctor wants to run some tests." He'd paused, looking out the window at the pedestrians hurrying past. And I've been thinking about things, about what would happen if something happened to me. Michael, don't talk like that. No, Mom, listen. I need you to listen. His voice had carried an urgency she'd never heard before. I've made some arrangements, changed some things. If anything ever happens to me, I want you to know that you're taken care of, okay? You and Sophie both. Sophie was their 3-year-old daughter, the light of Emma's life, the one good thing that had come from Michael's marriage to Olivia. Emma had started to ask what he meant, but Michael had changed the subject and she'd let it go. You don't expect your 34-year-old son to die 2 weeks later. Now, as she sat beside his hospital bed, those words echoed in her mind with prophetic weight. Olivia returned after an hour, her phone conversation apparently concluded. She perched on the edge of the visitor's chair as if she might flee at any moment. "The funeral home can handle everything," she said without preamble. "I've already started making arrangements." Emma blinked. "Funeral home?" "We have to be realistic, Emma. The doctor said, 'He's still alive.'" The words came out harsher than Emma intended. "He's still fighting." Olivia's expression softened slightly, but it felt calculated, like she was remembering to perform grief. "Of course. I just meant we should be prepared." They sat in silence after that, 2 women watching the man they both claimed to love slip away from them. But Emma could feel the difference in their grief like a chill in the room. Her own sorrow was a weight that pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Olivia's seemed more like impatience, as if she were waiting for a delayed flight. At 11:47 p.m., the machines finally fell silent. The funeral was everything Olivia had planned it to be: elegant, expensive, and cold. White roses instead of the sunflowers Michael had always loved. Classical music instead of the blues he'd played on his guitar. A reception at the country club instead of the family diner where he'd proposed to Olivia 5 years earlier. Emma sat in the front pew, holding 3-year-old Sophie on her lap. The little girl didn't understand why everyone was sad, why Mommy kept crying pretty tears that didn't mess up her mascara, why Daddy wasn't coming home. She kept asking for Dada in a whisper that broke Emma's heart into smaller and smaller pieces. "Dada's sleeping," Olivia had told her daughter earlier, which Emma thought was a terrible thing to say to a child about death. But she bit her tongue. It wasn't her place anymore, was it? She was just the grandmother now, the old woman who lived alone in her small house across town. The pastor, a man who'd never met Michael, spoke in generalities about a life well lived and God's plan. Emma tuned him out, focusing instead on the memories that crowded her mind. Michael at 5, losing his first tooth and putting it under his pillow for the tooth fairy. Michael at 16, bringing home his first girlfriend and blushing when Emma offered them lemonade. Michael at 28, calling to tell her he was going to propose, so nervous and excited he could barely form sentences. After the service, people filed past offering condolences. Emma recognized some of them, Michael's colleagues, neighbors, college friends. But many were strangers, Olivia's people, dressed in expensive black and speaking in hushed tones about portfolios and property values. "I'm so sorry for your loss," said a woman Emma had never seen before. "Olivia's told me so much about you." Had she? Emma wondered what stories Olivia might have shared about her mother-in-law. Probably nothing too flattering. At the reception, Emma found herself relegated to a corner table with some distant relatives who spent the entire time discussing their various ailments and medications. She watched as Olivia worked the room like a political candidate, accepting sympathy with practiced grace, discussing practical matters with those who inquired. "Such a tragedy," Emma overheard someone say to Olivia, "and so young. At least he left you well provided for." Olivia's smile was tight. "We're still sorting through everything. These things take time." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "We're still sorting through everything." as if Michael's life had been reduced to a checklist of assets to be divided. That evening, after the guests had gone home and the flowers had been arranged for transport to the cemetery, Emma sat in her kitchen with a cup of tea, staring at the phone. She should call Olivia, check on Sophie, offer to help with whatever needed to be done. That's what a good mother-in-law would do. Instead, she found herself thinking about Michael's lawyer, David Rosen, who had approached her briefly at the reception. "Mrs. Patterson, when you're ready, we should talk. Michael left specific instructions about his estate. There will be a formal reading of the will next week, but I wanted you to know that he thought of you. He thought of you very much." She'd nodded, too numb to process what he meant. Now, alone in her kitchen, his words began to take shape. Michael had mentioned arrangements, provisions for her and Sophie. At the time, she had assumed he meant life insurance, maybe a small savings account. Every parent worries about leaving something for their children. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was Olivia. "Emma, I hope I didn't wake you." "No, dear. I couldn't sleep either. I've been thinking about practical things. I know it seems soon, but there's so much to take care of. Michael's car payments, the mortgage on the house." Olivia's voice trailed off delicately. "Of course, whatever you need. I was wondering, would you be able to help? I know you don't have much, but even a little would make such a difference, for Sophie's sake." Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Help how?" "Well, you know how expensive everything is. The funeral alone was $15,000, and the house payment is due next week. I'm not sure how I'm going to manage it all on my own." On her own, as if Michael had been unemployed, as if he hadn't been a successful architect with his own firm, as if he hadn't carried life insurance and owned property and maintained savings accounts. Emma had signed enough Christmas cards and birthday checks to know her son had been financially comfortable. "I thought Michael had life insurance," Emma said carefully. "Oh, he did, but these things take time to process. The insurance company has to investigate, make sure everything was legitimate. It could be months before I see any money." Olivia's voice became smaller, more vulnerable. "I just don't know how I'm going to keep the house. Sophie's so little, and this is the only home she's ever known." The only home she's ever known. Emma had helped Michael and Olivia buy that house, contributing $10,000 from her retirement savings for the down payment. Loan, Michael had insisted, though they'd never discussed repayment terms. "How much do you need?" Emma asked. "I hate to even ask, but if you could manage $2,000, just to cover the mortgage and utilities until the insurance comes through. $2,000. It might as well have been $20,000. Emma's Social Security check was barely enough to cover her own modest expenses. She had maybe $3,000 in savings, money she had been setting aside for emergencies or Sophie's future education. "I'll see what I can do," she heard herself saying. "Oh, Emma, thank you so much. You're such a blessing. I don't know what Sophie and I would do without you." After Olivia hung up, Emma sat in the growing darkness of her kitchen, feeling like she'd been hollowed out from the inside. The woman who had arrived 6 hours late to her husband's deathbed was now asking his grieving mother for money to keep the house he'd worked so hard to provide. But what choice did she have? If Olivia lost the house, where would Sophie go? Emma's own place was barely large enough for one person, and while she would take in her granddaughter without hesitation, she couldn't provide the stability a 3-year-old needed. She thought about Michael's words again. "You're taken care of." What had he meant? And why did she have the growing feeling that Olivia knew something she didn't? 3 days later, Emma sat in her bank with a withdrawal slip in front of her, her hand trembling as she tried to write the numbers. $2,000 would leave her with barely enough to cover her own mortgage for another month. But Sophie's face kept appearing in her mind, those bright blue eyes, so much like Michael's, that trusted Grammy to make everything okay. "Are you sure about this amount, Mrs. Patterson?" The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, looked concerned. "This represents most of your available savings. I'm sure. If you don't mind me asking, is this for something urgent? Sometimes scammers target elderly people." "It's for my granddaughter," Emma said firmly. "Family."
The teller processed the withdrawal with obvious reluctance, counting out the bills twice and asking Emma to verify the amount. $2,100 bills. It felt like she was holding her own blood. That afternoon, she drove to Michael and Olivia's house. Just Olivia's house now, she supposed. The neighborhood was one of those carefully planned developments where every lawn was precisely manicured and every mailbox identical. Michael had been so proud when they'd qualified for the mortgage, calling Emma to share the good news and promised she'd always have a place there if she needed it. Emma answered the door wearing yoga pants and a designer sweatshirt that probably cost more than Emma's monthly grocery budget. She looked surprised to see her mother-in-law. "Emma, I wasn't expecting you." "I brought the money." Emma held out the envelope containing the cash. "For the mortgage." "Oh, that's so sweet of you. Really, I can't tell you how much this means." Through the open door, Emma could see Sophie playing with blocks in the living room, building towers and knocking them down with delighted laughter. The sound was the first genuinely joyful thing Emma had heard since Michael's accident. "Can I see her for a minute?" Emma asked. Olivia hesitated. "She's been having a hard time. With the adjustment, I think it's better if we keep her routine as normal as possible. Too many visitors might confuse her." Too many visitors? Emma had been Sophie's primary babysitter for the past 3 years, watching her every Tuesday and Thursday while Olivia went to her book club and shopping appointments. She knew Sophie's favorite songs, her preferred bedtime stories, the exact way she liked her sandwiches cut. But now she was just another visitor. "Of course," Emma said quietly. "I understand. I'll call you soon," Olivia promised, already starting to close the door. "Maybe we can arrange a play date next week." A play date with her own granddaughter. Emma walked back to her car on unsteady legs, feeling like she'd just been dismissed from her own family. As she drove away, she caught a glimpse of Olivia in her rearview mirror, standing at the window with her phone pressed to her ear, the envelope of cash still in her hand. That evening, Emma found herself staring at Michael's number in her phone contacts. His voicemail was still active. She called it twice just to hear his voice saying, "You've reached Michael Patterson. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." The casual confidence of someone who expected to have time to return calls. Instead of calling his number again, she dialed David Rosen's office. She'd found his business card in her purse, the one he'd given her at the funeral. "Mrs. Patterson." His voice was warm when his secretary put her through. "I was hoping to hear from you. How are you holding up?" "I've been better," she admitted. "You said something at the funeral about Michael's instructions, about the will." "Yes. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I think it would be good for us to talk before the formal reading." "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly, but there are some things you should know, things Michael was very specific about."
Emma felt a flutter of something, hope maybe, or fear. "Can you tell me now?" "It's complicated, Mrs. Patterson, and I think it's better if we discuss it in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 2? After she hung up, Emma sat in her living room looking at the framed photographs that covered her mantelpiece. Michael at every age and stage, from baby pictures to his wedding day. In the more recent photos, she noticed something she'd missed before. Olivia's smile never quite reached her eyes, even in moments that should have been purely happy. She thought about the $2,000 she'd given away that afternoon, money she couldn't afford to lose. She thought about Olivia's designer clothes and perfect manicure, the expensive funeral, the casual way she'd asked for financial help while standing in the doorway of a house worth $300,000. Most of all, she thought about Michael's words, "You're taken care of." For the first time since the accident, Emma allowed herself to feel something other than grief. It was small and fragile, but it felt almost like hope. David Rosen's office was in one of those converted Victorian houses that gave legal practices an air of old money respectability. Emma undressed carefully for the meeting, wearing her best black dress and the pearl earrings Michael had given her for her 70th birthday. Rosen himself was younger than she'd expected, maybe 45, with graying temples and the kind of steady manner that probably served him well in family court. His office was lined with law books and family photos, a wife, 2 teenage daughters, a golden retriever. "Mrs. Patterson, thank you for coming." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thank you." Emma perched on the edge of the chair, her purse clutched in her lap. "You said there were things I should know about Michael's will?" "Yes." Rosen opened a thick file folder and pulled out several documents. "Michael came to see me about 6 months ago. He wanted to make some changes to his estate planning, significant changes." "What kind of changes?" "Let me start by asking you something. Are you aware of any financial difficulties Michael and Olivia might have been experiencing?" Emma frowned. "No." Olivia mentioned something about the insurance taking time to process, and she asked me for help with the mortgage payment, but I assumed that was temporary. Rosen's expression darkened slightly. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to tell you something that may be difficult to hear. Michael discovered that Olivia had been having an affair." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She actually gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. "That's not possible." "I'm afraid it is. He hired a private investigator when he started suspecting something was wrong. The affair had been going on for over a year with a man named Richard Hendricks, who works in real estate development." Emma felt the room spinning slightly. All those book club meetings, shopping trips, girls' weekends that kept Olivia away from home. Did he confront her? No, and that's where it gets complicated. Rosen leaned forward, his voice gentle but serious. Michael was planning to ask for a divorce, but then he started having those heart episodes. The doctor told him he was at risk for cardiac arrest. Apparently, there was an undiagnosed genetic condition that stress could trigger. He mentioned chest pains, Emma whispered. Michael was afraid that the stress of a divorce might literally kill him, but he was also afraid of what would happen to you and Sophie if he died while still married to Olivia. So he made some very careful, very strategic changes to his estate planning. What kind of changes? Rosen pulled out a thick document. 3 months ago, your son transferred the deed to the family house into your name. He also transferred ownership of both cars and moved a significant portion of his assets into an account with your name on it. On paper, at the time of his death, Michael owned almost nothing. Emma stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "I don't understand. The house you gave Olivia money to save, it legally belongs to you, Mrs. Patterson. The car she's been driving, yours. The savings account she's claiming takes months to access, that's yours too. Michael left everything to you, with a separate trust fund for Sophie's education and future needs." The room was silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on Rosen's desk. Emma tried to speak several times before any words came out. "How much?" "The house is worth approximately $300,000. There are 2 cars, the sedan Olivia drives, worth about $30,000, and Michael's truck, worth about $25,000. The bank accounts total just over $400,000, $750,000. Emma had never seen that much money written on a single piece of paper, let alone imagined owning it. But why didn't he tell me? "He wanted to protect you," Rosen said, simply. "And he wanted to see how Olivia would behave after his death. He suspected she might try to take advantage of you, and he wanted to make sure you were taken care of regardless of what she did." Emma thought about the $2,000 she'd handed over just yesterday, money she'd scraped together from her meager savings to help the woman who was already living in her house. What about Sophie? There's a separate trust for Sophie that Olivia can't touch. It will pay for her education, healthcare, and provide a modest inheritance when she turns 25. But Michael was very specific about one thing. He wanted you to have custody of Sophie if anything happened to him. Custody? It's all detailed in the will. He documented Olivia's neglect, her frequent absences, her priorities. Between the affair and the evidence he gathered about her parenting, he believed you'd be awarded custody in any court proceeding. Emma felt tears starting to flow, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't entirely tears of grief. "When is the formal reading?" "Tomorrow afternoon at 3. Olivia will be there, along with a few other beneficiaries. Michael left some money to charity and to a few close friends. But Mrs. Patterson, I need to warn you about something. What? This morning, Olivia filed a petition with the court claiming that Michael was not mentally competent when he made these changes to his will. She's alleging that you manipulated him into signing over his assets. Emma's brief moment of hope crumbled. Can she do that? She can try. But Michael anticipated this possibility. He had a full psychological evaluation done when he made the changes, including cognitive testing and interviews with multiple witnesses. He was very thorough, Mrs. Patterson. He loved you, and he wanted to make sure you were protected. Emma sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything she'd learned. Her son had been betrayed by his wife, had known he was dying, had spent his final months not wallowing in self-pity, but carefully constructing a plan to protect the people he loved most. There's one more thing, Rosen said quietly. Michael left you a letter. He asked me to give it to you before the will reading. He handed her a sealed envelope with her name written in Michael's careful handwriting. Emma held it like it contained her son's beating heart. Take your time. I'll be right outside if you need anything. After he left, Emma sat alone in the lawyer's office, holding the last words her son would ever speak to her. Finally, with trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. Mom, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened and I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about Olivia, about what I discovered. I didn't want to burden you with my problems when you've always been nothing but supportive and loving. I know she'll try to take advantage of you after I'm gone. She sees you as weak, as someone who won't fight back. She's wrong about that. You're the strongest person I know. But you're also kind, and sometimes kind people get taken advantage of by those who mistake kindness for weakness. Everything is yours now, Mom. The house, the cars, the money, all of it. I worked hard for those things, but they mean nothing compared to knowing that you and Sophie will be okay. Olivia doesn't know about the changes I made. Let her show you who she really is. Let her reveal her true character. Then you'll know what you're dealing with.
Take care of Sophie for me. She's going to need you in ways Olivia can't provide. You're the grandmother who shows up, who remembers bedtime stories and favorite foods, who makes everything feel safe and warm. Olivia can buy things, but you give love. Sophie will know the difference. I'm not afraid of dying, Mom. I'm only afraid of leaving you and Sophie unprotected. But I know you'll take care of each other. You'll be fierce when you need to be, and gentle when that's what's required. You'll be exactly what Sophie needs you to be. Thank you for being the best mother a son could ask for. Thank you for Sunday dinners and birthday cakes, and being proud of me even when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for loving Olivia when I asked you to, even when she made it difficult. The house key is in the small box in my desk drawer, the one where I kept my cufflinks. You have every right to be there. It's your house now. Love, always. Michael. P.S. Tell Sophie that Daddy loved her more than all the stars in the sky, and that Grammy loves her just as much. Emma read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. When David Rosen returned to his office, he found her sitting straighter in her chair, her eyes dry and focused. "Are you all right, Mrs. Patterson?" "I will be," she said, folding the letter carefully and placing it in her purse. "What do I need to do?" "For now, nothing. Come to the will reading tomorrow and let Olivia hang herself with her own rope. Michael documented everything very carefully. Her petition will be dismissed, and you'll take possession of your inheritance. And Sophie, we'll file for custody immediately after the will reading. Given the evidence Michael compiled about Olivia's neglect and infidelity, I'm confident you'll be awarded full custody. Sophie will be home with you within a week." Emma stood to leave, feeling steadier than she had since the accident. At the door, she turned back to Rosen. "Mr. Rosen, that private investigator Michael hired, do you still have his contact information?" "Yes." "Why?" "I think I'd like to know exactly who Richard Hendricks is, and I think I'd like to know what Olivia's been telling people about me." Rosen smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "I'll have that information for you tomorrow, Mrs. Patterson, right after you become one of the wealthiest widows in the county." Emma spent that evening in a strange state of suspended animation. She walked through her small house, seeing everything differently. The worn furniture that would soon be replaced, the stack of overdue bills that would soon be paid, the empty refrigerator that reflected years of stretching her Social Security check to cover basic needs. But mostly, she thought about Olivia. For 3 years, Emma had tried to love her daughter-in-law the way Michael had asked her to. She'd overlooked the subtle slights, the casual cruelties, the way Olivia had gradually pushed her out of Sophie's daily life. She'd attributed these things to different personalities, different backgrounds, the natural tensions that sometimes exist between mothers and daughters-in-law. Now she understood that what she'd interpreted as personality conflicts had actually been calculated manipulation. Olivia hadn't been careless with Emma's feelings. She'd been strategic. Every slight, every dismissal, every gradual reduction of Emma's role in Sophie's life had been designed to establish a hierarchy with Olivia at the top and Emma at the bottom. The $2,000 Emma had handed over yesterday wasn't the first time Olivia had asked for money. There had been smaller requests over the years, $20 here, $50 there, always with apologetic explanations about forgotten wallets or delayed paychecks. Emma had never asked for the money back, and Olivia had never offered to repay it. At the time, Emma had been grateful that her daughter-in-law felt comfortable enough to ask for help. Now she realized she'd been seen as an ATM, not family. That night, Emma called her sister Ruth in Florida. "Emma, how are you holding up, honey?" "I'm doing better than expected," Emma said carefully. "Ruth, I need to ask you something. Remember when you met Olivia at the wedding? What did you think of her?" There was a pause. Ruth had always been the blunt one in the family, the sister who said what everyone else was thinking but too polite to voice. "Do you really want to know?" "Yes." "I thought she was cold as a fish and twice as calculating. I kept waiting for Michael to wise up, but that boy was smitten. Why are you asking?" Emma told her sister everything. About Michael's letter, about the inheritance, about Olivia's behavior since the funeral. Ruth listened without interruption, making occasional sounds of disgust. "That scheming little witch, taking money from you while she's sitting on a house worth $300,000? Emma, you have to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you won't feel guilty about what happens to her tomorrow. She made her choices. She chose to cheat on your son, she chose to treat you like garbage, and she chose to try and steal from you after he died. Whatever consequences come from that, she earned them." "I know, but Sophie will be fine. Better than fine. She'll be with someone who actually loves her instead of seeing her as a meal ticket or a prop in some grieving widow performance." After they hung up, Emma felt a strange sense of clarity settling over her. For too many years, she'd been the accommodating one, the peacemaker, the grandmother who didn't want to cause problems. She'd swallowed her opinions and ignored her instincts because she'd been afraid of losing access to Sophie. Tomorrow, everything would change. She spent the evening going through Michael's childhood photos, remembering the boy who had grown into a man wise enough to protect his mother from beyond the grave. In one picture, he was maybe 8 years old, standing in front of their old house with a gap-toothed grin and a baseball glove that was too big for his hand. He'd been so proud of that glove, had slept with it under his pillow for weeks. "You thought of everything, didn't you, baby?" she whispered to the photo. "Even when you were dying, you were still taking care of me." The will reading was scheduled for 3 o'clock at David Rosen's office. Emma arrived 15 minutes early, wearing her best navy dress and the pearl necklace Michael had given her for Christmas 2 years ago. She felt armored in dignity and purpose. Olivia was already there, dressed in an expensive black suit that probably cost more than Emma's monthly expenses. She was checking her phone, of course, and barely looked up when Emma entered the waiting room. "Emma," she said without warmth, "I hope you don't mind, but I've brought my attorney with me.
just to make sure everything is handled properly. Her attorney was a sharp-looking man in his 50s, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from winning ugly cases. He looked at Emma like she was something he might scrape off his shoe. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, not offering to shake hands. "I'm James Crawford. I represent Mrs. Olivia Patterson. I understand there may be some irregularities with your son's will that we'll need to address." "Irregularities?" Emma kept her voice mild, curious. "Concerns about his mental state when certain documents were signed, possible undue influence from family members. These things happen sometimes with elderly individuals facing medical crises." Emma almost smiled. Elderly individuals? Michael was 34 years old. David Rosen appeared in the doorway to his office. "Everyone's here, I see. Shall we begin?" They filed into his conference room, a formal space with a long mahogany table and portraits of distinguished-looking men in judicial robes. Rosen took his seat at the head of the table, with Emma on one side and Olivia and her attorney on the other. "Before we begin," Crawford interjected, "I want to state for the record that my client has concerns about the validity of certain recent changes to Mr. Michael Patterson's will. We believe he was not of sound mind when—" "Mr. Crawford," Rosen interrupted smoothly, "I appreciate your concern, but perhaps we should actually read the will before we discuss challenges to its validity?" Crawford sat back with obvious irritation, but nodded. Rosen opened the official-looking document and began to read. His formal language was difficult to follow, full of legal terminology and precise definitions, but the basic structure began to emerge. Michael had left small bequests to several charities, $5,000 each to organizations that supported cardiac research and children's literacy. He'd left $10,000 to his best friend from college and another $10,000 to his former business partner. Then Rosen reached the main provisions. "To my beloved daughter, Sophie Marie Patterson, I leave a trust fund of $100,000 to be administered by my mother, Emma Patterson, for Sophie's education, healthcare, and general welfare. This trust will provide Sophie with $25,000 on her 18th birthday, $25,000 on her 21st birthday, and the remaining $50,000 on her 25th birthday." Olivia shifted in her seat but didn't speak. That was Sophie's money, safely protected from anyone who might try to access it for other purposes. Rosen continued, "To my wife, Olivia Catherine Patterson, I leave my personal effects, including my clothing, jewelry, and personal mementos, as well as the sum of $50,000 from my life insurance policy." $50,000. Emma watched Olivia's face carefully. There was no surprise there, no relief at learning she would receive something substantial. Instead, there was a tightness around her eyes that suggested she'd been expecting much more. "The remainder of my estate," Rosen continued, "including all real property, vehicles, and financial assets not otherwise specified, I leave to my mother, Emma Rose Patterson, with full confidence that she will use these resources wisely and with love." The room fell silent. Crawford leaned over to whisper urgently in Olivia's ear, but she shook her head sharply. "I'm sorry," Olivia said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "but there must be some mistake. Michael and I owned that house together. We bought it together. My name is on the mortgage." Rosen consulted another document. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, your name was removed from the deed 3 months ago when your husband transferred full ownership to his mother. The mortgage remains in both your names, but ownership of the property itself belongs exclusively to Mrs. Emma Patterson." "That's impossible." Olivia's careful composure began to crack. "Michael would never— he wouldn't do that without telling me." "The transfer was properly executed and filed with the county recorder's office," Rosen said calmly. "I have all the documentation here if you'd like to review it." Crawford finally found his voice. "This is exactly what we were afraid of. My client's husband was clearly not thinking rationally when he made these changes. No man in his right mind would leave his wife homeless while giving everything to his mother." "Mr. Crawford," Rosen's voice carried a warning edge, I would be very careful about questioning Mr. Michael Patterson's mental competency, particularly given that he had a full psychological evaluation performed at the time these changes were made. He pulled out another thick folder. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a licensed psychiatrist, conducted extensive interviews with your client's husband over a period of 3 sessions. Her report concluded that he was not only mentally competent, but remarkably clear-thinking for someone facing his health challenges. What health challenges? Olivia demanded. Michael was fine. He never mentioned any health problems to me. Emma felt something cold settle in her chest. Her son had been dealing with a potentially fatal heart condition, planning for his own death, and his wife hadn't even noticed. According to Dr. Martinez's report, Mr. Patterson was very forthcoming about his motivations for these changes. He had discovered that his wife was engaged in an extramarital affair and was concerned about how his assets would be handled in the event of his death. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite exploded yet. Olivia got very still, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "That's a lie," she whispered. "I'm afraid it's not." Rosen pulled out yet another folder. Mr. Patterson hired a private investigator, Marcus Webb, who documented a 13-month affair between Mrs. Olivia Patterson and Mr. Richard Hendricks of Hendricks Property Development. The investigation included photographs, credit card records showing hotel stays, and phone records showing extensive communication between Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Hendricks. Crawford was frantically scribbling notes, but even he seemed to understand that his case was evaporating. Even if that's true, it justifies everything, Rosen said firmly. A man has every right to leave his property to whomever he chooses, particularly when he has evidence that his spouse has violated their marriage vows. But there's more.
More? Emma couldn't imagine what else Michael might have uncovered. Dr. Martinez's evaluation also included interviews with several witnesses who could speak to Mr. Patterson's state of mind and his relationship with both his wife and his mother. These witnesses included neighbors, colleagues, and friends who had observed the family dynamics over several years. Rosen opened the report and began reading selected excerpts. According to Mrs. Janet Williams, the Pattersons' neighbor, Olivia was frequently absent from family activities and seemed more interested in her phone than in her husband or daughter. Emma, on the other hand, was constantly involved in Sophie's care and was clearly devoted to the whole family. Emma remembered Janet Williams, the elderly woman who lived next door to Michael and Olivia. She was always gardening in her front yard when Emma came to babysit Sophie, always ready with a friendly wave and a comment about the weather. Mr. Tom Bradley, Michael's business partner, stated that Michael was increasingly concerned about his wife's behavior and spending habits. He mentioned several times that he was worried about what would happen to his mother and daughter if something happened to him, because Olivia didn't seem to prioritize their welfare. Emma had met Tom Bradley at several company barbecues. He was a quiet man with a dry sense of humor who clearly respected Michael's work ethic and integrity. Most significantly, Rosen continued, Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, the estranged wife of Richard Hendricks, provided detailed information about the affair, including evidence that Mrs. Olivia Patterson had discussed her plans to get rid of the old woman once she inherited Michael's estate. The room went completely silent. Emma felt like she'd been slapped. Get rid of the old woman. So she'd gone right. Olivia had been planning to push her out of Sophie's life entirely. Olivia's face had gone from pale to flushed with anger. That woman is lying. She's bitter about her divorce, and she's trying to cause trouble. Mrs. Hendricks provided audio recordings of conversations between you and her husband, conversations in which you discussed your impatience with your interfering mother-in-law and your plans to relocate to another state once you inherited Michael's assets. Audio recordings. Emma's hands began to tremble. Her son had died knowing that his wife planned to take his daughter away from the only grandmother she'd ever known. "This is harassment," Crawford declared, but his voice lacked conviction.
Even if my client made some unfortunate personal choices, that doesn't change the fact that she was legally married to the deceased and has rights as his widow. She has the rights specified in the will: $50,000 and his personal effects. That's what his husband chose to leave her, and that's what she'll receive. Olivia finally found her voice again. What about Sophie? You can't expect me to just give up my daughter.
Emma looked across the table at Olivia, trying to see some hint of the woman Michael had fallen in love with. But all she could see now was anger, calculation, and a complete absence of genuine grief for the husband she lost. How long? Emma asked quietly. I'm sorry? Rosen looked confused. How long was she planning to let me believe I was poor? How long before she would have told me about the house? Rosen consulted the private investigator's report. According to the recorded conversations, Mrs. Patterson planned to wait until after the estate was settled, then inform you that you would need to find alternative housing because she was selling the property. Emma nodded, unsurprised. It fit with everything else she'd learned about her daughter-in-law's character. Olivia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You're all insane if you think any court will uphold this character assassination disguised as a will. Mrs. Patterson, Rosen's voice remained perfectly professional. You're welcome to contest any aspect of your late husband's will. However, I should inform you that doing so will require you to undergo court-ordered psychological evaluation, and all of the evidence we've discussed today will become part of the public record. According to the custody provisions in Mr. Patterson's will, Rosen consulted another document. He expressed his strong preference that Sophie be raised by her grandmother in the event that questions arose about Mrs. Olivia Patterson's fitness as a mother. Questions about my fitness? Olivia's voice rose to nearly a shriek. I'm her mother, a mother who left her 3-year-old daughter with babysitters an average of 4 nights per week, a mother who was having an affair for over a year, a mother who arrived 6 hours late to the hospital when her husband was dying. Rosen's voice was calm but devastating. Mr. Patterson documented all of this, Mrs. Patterson. Every missed bedtime, every canceled family event, every time you chose your personal activities over your family responsibilities. Emma thought about all the times Olivia had called at the last minute, asking her to watch Sophie because something had come up. All the times she'd arrived late to pick up her daughter or forgotten about school events, or seemed irritated when Sophie needed attention during adult conversations. Furthermore, Rosen continued, the custody petition includes testimony from Sophie's pediatrician, Dr. Ellen Kumar, who noted that Mrs. Emma Patterson accompanied Sophie to most of her medical appointments, was better informed about Sophie's health history than her mother, and clearly had a stronger bond with the child. Dr. Kumar was a kind woman who had always seemed pleased to see Emma in the waiting room with Sophie. Emma had never realized the doctor was paying attention to family dynamics, but she supposed medical professionals were trained to notice these things. Crawford made one last attempt. Your Honor, Mr. Rosen, surely you can see that this entire situation is highly irregular. A man essentially disinheriting his wife in favor of his mother, making custody arrangements that ignore the rights of the biological parent. Mr. Crawford, I'm not a judge. I'm simply reading the will as written by your client's late husband. If Mrs. Olivia Patterson wishes to contest these provisions, she's welcome to do so in court. However, I should warn you that Mr. Michael Patterson was extraordinarily thorough in documenting his reasons for these decisions. He gestured to the stack of folders on the table. We have psychological evaluations, witness statements, evidence of adultery, financial records showing Mrs. Patterson's excessive spending, and documentation of child neglect. We also have Mrs. Patterson's own recorded statements about her intentions regarding both her mother-in-law and her daughter. Emma looked across the table at Olivia, trying to see some hint of the woman Michael had fallen in love with, but all she could see now was anger, calculation, and a complete absence of genuine grief for the husband she lost. How long?
Emma asked. I'm sorry. Rosen looked confused. How long was she planning to let me believe I was poor? How long before she would have told me about the house? Rosen consulted the private investigator's report. According to the recorded conversations, Mrs. Patterson planned to wait until after the estate was settled, then inform you that you would need to find alternative housing because she was selling the property. Emma nodded, unsurprised. It fit with everything else she'd learned about her daughter-in-law's character. Olivia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You're all insane if you think this entire situation is highly irregular. A man essentially disinheriting his wife in favor of his mother, making custody arrangements that ignore the rights of the biological parent. Mr. Crawford, I'm not a judge. I'm simply reading the will as written by your client's late husband. If Mrs. Olivia Patterson wishes to contest these provisions, she's welcome to do so in court. However, I should warn you that Mr. Michael Patterson was extraordinarily thorough in documenting his reasons for these decisions. He gestured to the stack of folders on the table. We have psychological evaluations, witness statements, evidence of adultery, financial records showing Mrs. Patterson's excessive spending, and documentation of child neglect. We also have Mrs. Patterson's own recorded statements about her intentions regarding both her mother-in-law and her daughter.
Olivia's face went white. Having her affair and neglect of Sophie discussed in open court would destroy whatever reputation she hoped to maintain in their small community. We'll need time to review all of this, Crawford said, gathering his papers with obvious haste. My client has been through a tremendous trauma, and these accusations are deeply unfair. Of course, Rosen agreed. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, Mrs. Emma Patterson will take possession of her inherited property, and will be filing the custody petition tomorrow morning. After Olivia and her lawyer left, Olivia without saying a single word to Emma, the conference room felt peaceful for the first time all afternoon. How are you doing, Mrs. Patterson? Rosen asked gently. I feel like I've been living in a play where everyone else knew the script except me. All these years, I thought I was the problem. I thought there was something wrong with me that made Olivia treat me the way she did. There was nothing wrong with you. Your son saw what was happening, and he did everything in his power to protect you and Sophie. When can I see Sophie? Olivia has 24 hours to respond to our custody filing. If she contests it, there will be a hearing. But given the evidence we have, I expect you'll have Sophie by the end of the week. Emma felt tears starting again, but these were different tears. Relief, gratitude, anticipation. Can I go to the house now? It's your house, Mrs. Patterson. You can do whatever you want with it. Emma sat in her car outside Michael and Olivia's house, her house, for several minutes before working up the courage to go inside. She had Michael's key, the one he'd mentioned in his letter, retrieved from his desk drawer where she'd found it exactly where he'd said it would be. The house looked different now that she knew it belonged to her. The carefully manicured lawn, the expensive landscaping, the double garage, all of it was hers. More importantly, it was Sophie's home, and it would remain Sophie's home. Emma let herself in through the front door, half expecting Olivia to appear and demand to know what she was doing there. But the house was quiet. Olivia's car was gone from the driveway. She walked slowly through the rooms, seeing them with new eyes. The living room where Sophie played with her blocks, where Emma had read her countless bedtime stories during babysitting nights, the kitchen where she'd prepared snacks and helped with art projects, the dining room where they'd shared holiday meals, though those had become increasingly rare as Olivia found excuses to spend holidays with her own family or friends. In Sophie's room, Emma found evidence of hasty packing. Several drawers were open, clothes scattered on the floor. It looked like Olivia had grabbed essentials and left quickly after the will reading. On Sophie's nightstand, Emma found a framed photo of herself and Sophie at the park last summer, both of them grinning at the camera with ice cream stains on their shirts. Olivia must have overlooked it in her haste to pack. Emma picked up the photo, remembering that day clearly.
Sophie had insisted on feeding the ducks, had chased a butterfly for 20 minutes, had fallen asleep in the car on the way home with chocolate smeared on her cheeks. It had been a perfect grandmother day, the kind of simple joy that Olivia had never seemed to find in parenting. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Is this Emma Patterson?" The voice was female, hesitant. "Yes, this is Patricia Hendricks. I think we should talk." Patricia Hendricks, the estranged wife of Olivia's lover, the woman who had provided the recordings that exposed Olivia's true nature. "Yes," Emma said. "I think we should." They arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown in an hour. Emma spent the remaining time walking through her house, making mental notes about what needed to be done. Sophie's room would need redecorating. The current decor was too sophisticated for a 3-year-old, all muted colors and expensive accessories that were off-limits to small hands. Emma envisioned bright colors, toy boxes, walls where a little girl could hang her artwork without worrying about damaging expensive wallpaper. Patricia Hendricks was waiting in a corner booth when Emma arrived at the coffee shop. She was a woman in her early 40s, attractive in a tired sort of way, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd been through a difficult divorce. "Mrs. Patterson?" She stood as Emma approached. "Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me." "Thank you for what you did," Emma said simply, "for speaking up." They ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence for a moment before Patricia began to speak. "I want you to know that I didn't enjoy doing this. I'm not a vindictive person, and I don't take pleasure in other people's pain. But when I heard your son had died, and I knew what Olivia was planning, I couldn't let her destroy your family the way she destroyed mine." "How long had you known?" "About the affair? I suspected for months before I could prove it. Richard became careless, staying out late, hiding his phone, spending money we didn't have on expensive restaurants and hotels." Patricia's voice was bitter. "I hired the same private investigator your son used, actually. That's how I found out about Olivia." "The recordings? I started recording Richard's phone calls after I discovered the affair. I was gathering evidence for the divorce. Some of those calls were with Olivia, and she said terrible things about you." Emma braced herself. "What kind of things?"
She called you a pathetic old woman who was too stupid to realize you were being used. She said Michael only kept you around because he felt sorry for you. She laughed about how easily you gave her money whenever she asked for it. Each word hit Emma like a physical blow, but she needed to hear it. She needed to understand exactly who she'd been dealing with all these years. She also talked about her plans for after Michael's death. She was going to sell the house and move to California with Richard. She said she'd find a way to keep you from seeing Sophie because she didn't want that depressing old woman influencing her daughter. California. Sophie would have been taken 3,000 miles away, and Emma would never have known where to find her. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "Something I didn't tell the lawyer because I wasn't sure how to prove it." "What?" Olivia knew about Michael's heart condition. Emma's coffee cup clattered against the saucer. "That's not possible. She seemed surprised when I mentioned it." "She knew. Richard told me she'd been encouraging Michael to work longer hours, take on more stressful projects. She wanted him to have a heart attack." The words hung between them like a toxic cloud. Emma felt sick to her stomach. "You're saying she was trying to kill him?" "I'm saying she knew he had a weak heart, and she did everything she could to put stress on it. She wanted to be a young, wealthy widow instead of going through a messy divorce." Emma thought about the last few months of Michael's life, how exhausted he looked, how many late nights he had been working. She'd attributed it to his natural perfectionism, his desire to provide for his family. Now she wondered if Olivia had been pushing him toward an early grave. "Can you prove any of this?" Patricia shook her head. "Not in a court of law. But I know what I heard, Mrs. Patterson. Your daughter-in-law is not just selfish and greedy. She's dangerous." They talked for another hour, Patricia filling in details about Olivia's character that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The affair hadn't been a moment of weakness or a marriage gone wrong. It had been calculated from the beginning. Olivia had been planning her exit strategy from the moment she realized Richard Hendricks had more money than Michael Patterson. When they parted ways, Patricia handed Emma a business card. "That's my attorney's number," she said. "If Olivia tries to fight the custody decision, give him a call. He has copies of all the recordings, and he's willing to testify about what they contain." Driving home to her small house that would soon be replaced by her large house, Emma felt a strange mixture of emotions: grief for her son, who died knowing his wife was betraying him, anger at Olivia for the years of manipulation and cruelty, relief that Sophie would be safe, and something else, something she was almost ashamed to acknowledge, a fierce satisfaction that justice was being served. Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. It was David Rosen. "Mrs. Patterson, I have news. Olivia's attorney just called. They're not going to contest the will or the custody arrangement." Emma felt her knees go weak with relief. Really? Really? Apparently, Mrs. Patterson has decided to relocate to California immediately. She'll be relinquishing custody voluntarily in exchange for liberal visitation rights during school vacations. California, just as Patricia had predicted. When can Sophie come home? "Tomorrow, if you're ready. Child Services will do a brief home inspection, purely routine given the circumstances, and then Sophie will be placed in your care." After she hung up, Emma sat in her car for a long time, looking at her modest little house and thinking about the changes that were coming. Tomorrow, she would pick up her granddaughter and bring her to a home where she would be loved unconditionally, where bedtime stories were more important than business calls, where ice cream stains on clothes were badges of honor rather than sources of irritation. But tonight, she had one more thing to do. Emma drove to the cemetery as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Michael had always loved. His grave was still covered with flowers from the funeral, though many were beginning to wilt in the late summer heat. She knelt beside the headstone, simple granite with his name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Son and Father," and placed her hand on the cool surface. "I got your letter, baby, and I understand now what you were trying to tell me. You saw her for what she really was, and you protected Sophie and me the only way you could." The cemetery was quiet, except for the sound of wind in the trees and distant traffic from the highway. Emma found it peaceful rather than sad. This was where Michael's body rested, but his love, his fierce, protective love, lived on in the choices he made and the legacy he'd left behind. "Sophie's coming home tomorrow. To our house, your house. She's going to grow up knowing that her daddy loved her enough to make sure she'd always be safe, always be wanted, always be cherished." Emma thought about all the plans she had for raising Sophie. The bedtime stories, the baking projects, the trips to the park and the zoo, and all the places 3-year-olds found magical. She thought about school plays and soccer games, and teenage heartbreaks and college applications. She was 73 years old, which meant she might not see Sophie all the way to adulthood, but she would love her fiercely for whatever time they had together. As for Olivia, Emma paused, trying to find the right words. "I won't lie to you, Michael. I'm angry. I'm angry that she hurt you, that she used me, that she would have taken Sophie away from everyone who really loves her, but I'm not going to let that anger poison Sophie's life. When Sophie's old enough to ask questions about her mother, I'll tell her the truth. That mommy made some bad choices and moved away, but that doesn't mean Sophie wasn't loved." The sun had almost disappeared behind the horizon, and the cemetery was growing dark. Emma stood slowly, her knees protesting after kneeling on the hard ground. "I promise you, son, Sophie will know she's loved. She'll know she's wanted. She'll grow up feeling safe and secure and cherished. And when she's old enough to understand, I'll tell her about the father who loved her so much that he spent his last months making sure she'd be protected forever." Emma kissed her fingers and pressed them to Michael's headstone. "Thank you for taking care of us, baby. Even after you're gone, you're still taking care of us." The next morning, Emma woke up early and spent 2 hours preparing for Sophie's arrival. She'd already moved most of her essential belongings to Michael's house, her house,
and had Sophie's room ready with fresh sheets, familiar toys, and a small bouquet of flowers from the garden. The social worker, Miss Jennifer Walsh, was a kind woman in her 30s who clearly took her job seriously. She conducted a thorough but respectful inspection of the house, checking that it was child-safe and asking Emma about her plans for Sophie's care. Mrs. Patterson, I have to tell you, this is one of the most straightforward custody cases I've ever handled. Usually there are complications, family disputes, questions about the child's best interests, but in this case, it's clear that you've been Sophie's primary caregiver for most of her life, and that this arrangement serves her emotional and practical needs. At 10 o'clock, Ms. Walsh's car pulled into the driveway with Sophie in the back seat. Emma watched through the window as her granddaughter climbed out, looking small and confused, carrying a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Emma opened the front door and knelt down as Sophie ran toward her. "Grammy!" She threw herself into Emma's arms with the complete trust that only small children possess. "I missed you." "I missed you too, sweetheart." Emma held her granddaughter tight, breathing in the familiar scent of baby shampoo and innocence. "Welcome home. Is this my house now?" Sophie looked around with curiosity rather than fear. "This is our house now," Emma corrected gently. "Yours and mine. Where's Mommy?" Emma had prepared for this question, had practiced her response so she could deliver it calmly and age-appropriately. "Mommy had to go away for a while, sweetheart, but she loves you very much, and you're going to stay with Grammy." Sophie considered this seriously. "Can we have pancakes for lunch?" Emma laughed, the first genuinely joyful sound she'd made since Michael's accident. "Yes, we can have pancakes for lunch, dinner, and breakfast tomorrow if you want." "Yes," Sophie clapped her hands together. "And can we read the story about the bunny?" "We can read all the bunny stories you want." As Ms. Walsh drove away and Emma closed the front door, she felt a profound sense of completion. The house was no longer empty, no longer echoing with loneliness and grief. It was filled with a 3-year-old's laughter, with the promise of sticky fingerprints on windows and crayon marks on walls, and all the beautiful chaos that comes with raising a child. Sophie was already exploring, running from room to room with her rabbit clutched in her arms, claiming spaces and making them her own. In the kitchen, she dragged a chair to the counter so she could help Emma make pancakes, which mostly involved getting flour on everything and eating chocolate chips straight from the bag.
"Grammy," Sophie said as Emma flipped the first pancake, "are you sad about Daddy?" Emma paused, considering her answer. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm very sad about Daddy. But I'm also very happy that I get to take care of you. Sometimes people can be sad and happy at the same time." Sophie nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 3-year-old worldview. "Daddy's in heaven now." "That's right." "And he can see us from heaven?" "I think so, yes." "Then he can see me helping make pancakes." Sophie grinned and added another handful of chocolate chips to the batter. Emma smiled through her tears. "I think he'd love seeing you make pancakes." They spent the afternoon settling into routines that felt both new and familiar. Sophie napped in her new room while Emma unpacked boxes and made phone calls to the utility companies to transfer services, to Sophie's pediatrician to update contact information, to the preschool to arrange enrollment for the fall. When Sophie woke, they walked through the neighborhood together, Sophie chattering about everything she saw: dogs being walked, flowers in gardens, airplanes overhead. It was the kind of simple, perfect afternoon that Emma had dreamed about during all those years of limited visits and supervised time. That evening, as Emma was giving Sophie a bath, her granddaughter looked up at her with those serious blue eyes that were so much like Michael's. "Grammy, I love you." "I love you too, Sophie, more than all the stars in the sky." Sophie giggled. "That's what Daddy used to say." "He did?" "He said he loved me more than all the stars, and that Grammy loved me just as much as all the stars too." Emma felt her heart squeeze tight.
Even in Sophie's 3-year-old memory, Michael's final message had survived intact. Later, after Sophie was asleep in her new bed, with her rabbit tucked safely beside her, Emma sat on the front porch with a cup of tea and looked up at the night sky. The stars were particularly bright tonight, scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet. "Thank you," she whispered to the stars, to Michael, to whatever force in the universe ensures that love triumphs over selfishness, that children find their way to safety, that justice sometimes comes disguised as an inheritance. Her phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, her heart clenched, wondering if Olivia was having second thoughts about the custody arrangement. But it was from Ruth in Florida. "How's the first day going with Sophie?" Emma typed back, "Perfect. We made pancakes and read stories, and she told me she loves me more than all the stars in the sky. That's my great niece. And how are you doing with all the changes?" Emma looked through the living room window at Sophie's toys scattered on the coffee table, at the child-safe covers now installed on all the electrical outlets, at the family photos she'd already hung on the walls, pictures of Michael at every age, of Emma and Harold on their wedding day, of Sophie's first birthday party.
"I'm doing better than I've done in years," she typed back. "For the first time since Harold died, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And it was true. The grief for Michael would always be there, a constant ache in her chest that time would soften but never completely heal. The anger toward Olivia would fade eventually, replaced by pity for a woman who had chosen temporary pleasures over lasting love, who had traded a family for an affair, who would spend the rest of her life knowing she had abandoned her own daughter. But underneath the grief and anger was something stronger and more enduring, the quiet satisfaction of a battle won, a child protected, a family preserved. Michael's love had reached beyond death to ensure that Sophie would grow up safe and cherished. Emma's patience and wisdom had allowed Olivia to reveal her true character before any permanent damage was done. Tomorrow, Emma would wake up to the sound of small feet running down the hallway and a voice calling for Grammy. There would be breakfast to make and stories to read and 1,000 small moments of joy that come with raising a beloved child. There would be scraped knees to bandage and nightmares to comfort and milestones to celebrate. There would also be challenges, questions about Sophie's mother that would grow more complex as Sophie got older, financial decisions about managing her inheritance responsibly, and the physical demands of raising an energetic child at 73 years old. But tonight, all of that was tomorrow's worry. Tonight, Emma sat on her front porch in her beautiful house, listening to her granddaughter breathe peacefully in the room down the hall, surrounded by the tangible proof of her son's love and her own strength. She thought about the woman she'd been just 2 weeks ago, the accommodating grandmother who second-guessed herself, who accepted scraps of time with Sophie and felt grateful for them, who handed over her life savings to a woman who saw her as nothing more than a foolish old lady to be manipulated. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth, who recognized manipulation when she saw it, who could be fierce when fierceness was required, and gentle when gentleness was needed. Emma finished her tea and went inside to check on Sophie one more time. The little girl was sprawled across her bed with the complete abandon of childhood, one arm thrown over her rabbit, her hair spread across the pillow like spun gold. "Sweet dreams, my darling," Emma whispered, adjusting the covers and turning on the nightlight. "Tomorrow we'll start the rest of our life together." As she turned off the lights and made her way to her own bedroom, Emma felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The silence in the house was no longer empty, it was full of love and hope and the promise of countless tomorrows filled with laughter and stories and all the beautiful ordinariness of life lived with purpose. Michael was gone, but his love lived on in every provision he'd made, every precaution he'd taken, every moment of joy that Emma would share with Sophie.
Olivia had revealed herself to be exactly what Michael had suspected: selfish, calculating, and ultimately destructive. But her true nature had been exposed before she could do any permanent damage, and now she was someone else's problem, someone else's disappointment. Sophie was safe. Sophie was home. Sophie was loved. And Emma, after years of feeling like she was on the periphery of her own family, was finally exactly where she belonged, at the center of a little girl's world, with all the responsibility and joy and heartbreak and wonder that came with that sacred trust. The weight of silence that had pressed down on her for so many years was gone, replaced by something infinitely more precious: the sound of a child's laughter echoing through rooms that would now be filled with life and love for years to come. In the end, it wasn't the inheritance that mattered, not the house or the cars or the money, though they provided security and options that Emma had never expected to have. What mattered was the knowledge that love endures, that wisdom sometimes looks like patience, and that the best revenge against cruelty is simply living well and loving deeply.
Emma fell asleep that night to the sound of Sophie talking to her stuffed animals in the next room, planning adventures and tea parties, and all the important business of being 3 years old in a world where Grammy lived in the same house and pancakes were available on demand. It was the sound of a life beginning again, of hope taking root, of a family redefined but not broken. It was the sound of tomorrow, bright with possibility and rich with love. And somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, Emma could swear she heard Michael's voice, carried on the night wind through her open window. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for taking care of her. Thank you for being exactly who she needs you to be." "Always," Emma whispered back to the darkness. "Always and forever, my darling boy. Always and forever."